Most people do not lose with money because they never worked hard enough. They lose because the world does not pay them simply for trying. That is the first lesson people hate. They want money to behave like a moral scoreboard. Work hard, stay honest, show up, do your best. Then expect the world to hand back a proportional reward. That is not how the world works. The world does not price effort alone. It prices usefulness, it prices trust, it prices scale, it prices ownership, it prices what can be repeated without asking your body to do the same hour twice. And if you do not understand that, you can spend 20 years feeling righteous and still end up financially weak. I do not say that to be harsh. I say it because I think a lot of people waste too much of their life waiting for fairness to act like economics. It does not. Economics has its own language, its own rules, its own brutal indifference. A person can hate that. Fine. He will still be charged by it. That is why I have always thought the real divide is not rich versus poor. It is fluent versus non-fluent. The fluent person can read incentives, tools, structures, access, and leverage. The non-fluent person works inside systems he does not really understand. And because he does not understand them, he keeps making expensive mistakes that feel ordinary. The source you gave me circles around this in many forms. It says money works like a language, that understanding the rules matters more than just trying harder, that people rise by becoming more valuable and more scalable, and that wealth is built by access, leverage, ownership, and problem solving rather than effort alone. Fay-Falicite Fay-Turn 16 file 0, Fay-Falicite Fay-Turn 16 file 1, Fay-Falicite Fay-Turn 16 file 2, Fay-Falicite Fay-Turn 16 file 3, Fay. That is the real subject, not hustle, not passive income slogans, not some tired argument about whether rich people are good or bad. The real subject is, do you understand what the game actually rewards? Because if you do not, then every year becomes more tiring than it needs to be. You work, you earn, you spend, you wonder why the money disappears. You think the answer is more effort. Then you burn more fuel inside the same bad engine. That is not ambition. That is confusion. Now let me begin where most people begin getting charged without realizing it. Basic financial tools. A great many adults still do not understand the difference between having money and being legible to the money system. Those are not the same thing. A person may have cash in the bank and still be functionally weak in the eyes of the institutions that decide rates, terms, approvals, and access. This is why the source spends time on something people think is too basic to matter. Debit versus credit. It argues that debit may feel safer, but it does not help establish the kind of financial identity that lenders, landlords, and other institutions use when deciding how to treat you. It also notes that credit used properly opens doors that pure cash use often does not. Fay-Falicite Fay-Turn 16 file 0, Fay-Falicite Fay-Turn 16 file 4, Fay. That is exactly right. A debit card says, I have money now. A credit history says the machine has begun learning how to price me. That matters. People hate this because it feels impersonal. Good. Impersonal systems are often the ones that matter most. If a system cannot understand you, it cannot extend favorable trust. And favorable trust is one of the hidden edges of adulthood. Better rates, better terms, better access, better optionality. That is why I tell people that money is not only about possession, it is also about institutional readability. Can the system read you? Can it trust you? Can it classify you favorably? That is a powerful question. And it is one reason I get impatient when people pretend they are above learning the rules. You are not above them. You are merely paying for your ignorance in less obvious ways. Now let us move to debt, because this is where adults love childish slogans. Debt is evil. Debt is good. Debt is the key. Debt is the trap. Usually these people are not thinking. They are chanting. Debt is a tool, and tools become helpful or destructive depending on structure. The source handles this well. It argues that wealthy people often use debt attached to assets or productive opportunities, while ordinary people often use debt against their own future labor in order to consume. Now, Fay-Falicite Fay-Turn 16 file 2, Fay, that is one of the deepest distinctions in money. Debt that finances a symbol is one kind of life. Debt that finances a productive engine is another. One narrows your future. The other may enlarge it if you actually know what you are doing. I am not saying all leverage is wise. Far from it. Leverage is the accelerator, Charlie Munger. S. warning about leverage survives because it is brutally true. The source even cites the old line about people going broke by whiskey, women, and leverage. With leverage standing out as the serious danger, Fay-Falicite Fay-Turn 16 file 2, Fay, exactly. Leverage does not ask whether you are pointed wisely. It simply amplifies. That is why I dislike moralizing debt. I want to know what the debt is attached to, what cash flow it creates, what risk it introduces, whether it is financing impatience or financing productive structure. So much consumer debt is simply a rushed identity with interest attached. A person wants to feel upgraded now, so he borrows against years of future effort in exchange for a short emotional payoff. That is a terrible bargain. The feeling fades. The obligation stays. This is why I always say that impatience is one of the most expensive personality traits in money. Now, if we move beyond tools and into work, the same pattern appears again. People think working hard is enough. It is not. Hard work matters. I admire it, but hard work by itself does not scale. And if the thing you sell cannot scale, then your economics stay trapped inside your next hour. The source says this in multiple ways. It criticizes the idea that hustle alone creates wealth, and it argues that in a world where average execution gets cheaper, the people who rise are the ones who understand the game better, bring differentiated value, and create leverage instead of just more effort. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 16, file 2, Fay Felicite, Fay turn 16, file 3, Fay. That is exactly right. The world does not pay extra simply because your back hurts. It pays more when your value becomes easier to multiply. That can happen through ownership, through judgment, through design, through sales, through systems, through trust, through audience, through distribution, through capital, through code, through management, through any mechanism that lets one unit of your work continue producing after the hour is over. That is why the old ladder matters. Bricklayer, builder, architect, planner, all useful, none priced equally. Why? Because the farther up the ladder you go, the more your contribution affects the broader system, and the less your economics depend only on direct labor. The source uses different versions of this ladder and later shifts into modern language about NPCs, supporting players, and main characters. But the underlying truth is the same. Higher pay tends to follow broader consequence, clearer judgment, and more scalable usefulness. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 16, file 3, Fay. That is the real insight. If you are only paid when your hands move, then the body becomes the bottleneck. If you can design, coordinate, persuade, diagnose, or own, then the bottleneck changes. This is also why I tell employees to stop making moral arguments for their compensation and start making economic ones. Do not tell me you work very hard. Everybody says that. Tell me what you improve, what you prevent, what you unlock, what you simplify, what the machine does better, because you are inside it. The source says employees should learn how they make money for the business, quantify that value, and then figure out how to make the company even more. Only then do they really have leverage in salary discussions. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 16, file 0, Fay. That is adult thinking. Hard work is easy to claim. Economic value is harder to fake. And because it is harder to fake, it prices better. This is also why I think people misunderstand career mobility. They think every discomfort means leave. Sometimes you should leave. Sometimes the better move is to learn how to gain internal leverage before you go. Can you negotiate scope? Can you attach yourself to growth? Can you redesign your role? Can you become so useful that the company has to see you differently? Those are valuable skills. Skip them too early and you may keep changing jobs without ever learning the deeper game. And this leads naturally to one of my favorite ideas from the source. Rocket ships versus smooth buses. The source argues that especially early in life, people should seek fast, growing, messy, upward-moving environments rather than optimizing too early for comfort, smoothness, and predictability. It says rocket ships are chaotic but full of learning and upside, while smooth buses often hide stagnation under comfort. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 16, file 0, Fay. That is excellent advice. Young people in particular often overprice smoothness. They think turbulence is the danger. Usually stagnation is the danger. A rocket ship is messy, poorly organized, stressful, demanding. Good, that is often what real growth feels like from the inside. A smooth bus may feel mature. It may also be a very elegant route to irrelevance. I would rather be in a place where the machine is moving hard enough that I can learn how money, people, and decisions actually interact. That education is worth a lot. Now let us talk about ownership, because this is where most people start admiring wealth from the outside without understanding the engine. People see the result. They do not see the structure. The source makes a useful point here when it says wealthy people are not just laboring harder, they are often using ownership, leverage, and strategic structures differently from ordinary workers. Fay Felicite, Fay turn 16, file 2, Fay. Exactly. Ownership changes the way time behaves. If you only sell labor, time is always chasing you. If you own part of an engine, then time can begin working with you. That engine might be stock ownership, it might be business ownership, it might be a stake in something that produces beyond your direct hours. But until that shift happens, the body remains the main machine. And bodies, as you and I know, are expensive things to rely on forever. This is why I dislike the way people talk about passive income. The source is blunt on this point, and I agree. Most passive income talk is fantasy marketing. Assets sold as passive usually have more maintenance, risk, or complexity than advertised. File site turn 16 file 3 that is exactly right. People do not actually want passive income. They want freedom from bad work, dignity, and more control over their lives. Passive income is just the fantasy label they attach to that longing. Fine. But fantasies distort maps. Rental property is not passive. Owning businesses is not passive. Even index investing is not passive in the emotional sense. If your psychology is weak and you keep touching the portfolio, everything has weight, everything has maintenance, everything has risk. I strongly favor owning things that scale beyond labor. I do not favor lying about their cost. Nothing valuable comes with zero responsibility. Now let us deal with one of the biggest ways people fool themselves: passion. Follow your passion is often lousy economic advice. People confuse what they enjoy with what the market will price generously. Those are not the same thing. The source says many highly paid opportunities sit in what it calls the boring, sexy matrix. Economically useful, less glamorous fields with less crowded attention. It also distinguishes loving a game from trying to monetize every hobby. File site turn 16 file 0 that is one of the sanest ideas in the whole file. The glamorous fields are crowded because status crowds them. The boring fields often pay because utility protects them. I am not telling anyone to pick work they hate. I am telling people to stop assuming joy and compensation naturally align. Sometimes the smarter move is to find a game you can learn to love because the economics are strong and the skill stack compounds. You may not have been born obsessed with tax, logistics, operations, software, sales, or analytics. Fine, you may become obsessed once the game becomes legible, and you see how mastery changes your freedom. That is how adults should think. Not what hobby can I force into profit, but what game can I become so good at that the world starts pricing me differently. Now we need to talk about entrepreneurship, because this is where people get flattered into bad decisions. I do not worship reckless entrepreneurship. I admire intelligent experimentation. The source makes this point well. It says people do not need to go all in on a passion just because survivorship. Bias stories celebrate dramatic leaps. It argues that keeping your salary while building a business can be a much smarter path because stable cash flow improves decision quality. It draws a distinction between a passion project and a profit project. File site turn 16 file 1 That is exactly right. A salary is not always a prison. Sometimes it is your seed capital. Sometimes it is your emotional stability. Sometimes it is the only reason you can experiment without becoming stupid from pressure. People romanticize pressure because pressure makes a good story. Pressure also destroys discernment, and discernment matters. A side business becoming a real machine is more impressive to me than a dramatic leap into a fragile fantasy. Now let us talk about people, because relationships are often treated as separate from money. They are not. Statistics are not destiny. Some marriages destroy wealth. Some single people build extraordinary lives. But the larger principle is still useful. Your closest relationships are either economic amplifiers or economic drags. A person who chooses a partner with no discipline, no honesty, no patience, and no respect for rules is not making only a romantic choice. He is making an economic choice. The source suggests that partners do not need to be playing exactly the same game, but they do need to complement and support the life being built. It also argues that partnership can often be a financial amplifier over time. File site turn 16 file 0 that is exactly right. I do not need mirrored ambition. I need aligned values. That matters more. Money reveals people quickly, how they handle fairness, constraint, embarrassment, delay, generosity, planning. Those are not side issues, they are compounding issues. Now let us go to what may be the most useful distinction in the whole source. Fixers versus freeloaders. In every system, there are people who see a problem and move toward solving it, and people who see a problem and wait for someone else to carry it. Profit and opportunity collect around the fixers. That is not an accident. Every problem is a pricing event. Every recurring frustration is a market. The freeloader sees inconvenience and asks who will deal with it. The fixer sees inconvenience and asks what this reveals. That second question is where the money often hides. I have believed this my whole life. Whenever I find recurring pain in a system, I ask whether it is local or general. If it is general, somebody who solves it well becomes economically important. That is why I tell young people to become habitually useful around unsolved pain. Notice the thing no one wants. Handle it, see the bottleneck no one claims, relieve it. That is how people become indispensable. And indispensable people are easier to trust, easier to price, and easier to scale. Now let me pull all of this together. If you want to build wealth, stop asking first how to make more money. Ask whether you are becoming easier for the world to multiply. Are you easier to trust, easier to price, easier to scale, easier to back, easier to read, easier to attach capital systems or ownership to? Do you understand the difference between access and cash? Between consumption debt and productive leverage, between labor and scalable value, between a hobby and a real economic game, between status and structure, between passive income fantasy and owned systems, between smooth comfort and useful motion, between freeloading and fixing. Those distinctions matter. Wealth is not built mainly by hacks. It is built by becoming economically legible and economically useful in ways that can extend beyond your next direct hour. That is how I would teach the whole subject, not as a collection of gimmicks. As a philosophy of economic adulthood. Economic adulthood means you stop expecting effort alone to save you. It means you stop pretending all debt is identical. It means you stop confusing every preference with a market opportunity. It means you stop asking for a smooth ride and start seeking useful motion. It means you choose tools, environments, and relationships with the understanding that all of them affect your access, your leverage, your options, and your balance sheet. Most of all, it means this: you stop being intimidated by money. You study it, you learn its grammar, you learn the rules of the games around it, then you participate more intelligently. That is how wealth begins for most people. Not in one grand leap. In the moment they stop treating money like a mystery and start treating it like a language they have finally decided to speak. Once that happens, everything else gets easier. Not easy, easier, and easier compounded over enough years is often all you ever needed.